So on behalf of the Dunbartonshire CA, my name is Lydia, and I would like to thank you for coming this afternoon and welcome you to our local church hall. And we're delighted to have this afternoon Ruth Watson, who I think basically took it upon herself to start the Keep Scotland Brand campaign, which realised that everything was becoming covered in Union Jacks a few years ago. And I know, Ruth, that you've been down to the Houses of Parliament and given evidence to the Select Committee, and you're also running the campaign very successfully in Scotland, and we're delighted to have you here to listen to and hopefully ask questions of later. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ruth Watson.
Thank you all very much for coming along today. My name's Ruth Watson, and I started the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign after I went to buy some carrots. And being a good Scottish mammy, I thought I would go and make some carrot coriander soup, because it's one of the few things that my children won't complain about. So I went down to the shops to buy my carrots, and the local copy, I walked in, and the week before, the carrots that I bought had just been carrots from Angus, and I knew the field that they came from, because where I live, I'm lucky enough to live in a beautiful part of Scotland, Kirriemuir, and I look across the Angus Strath of Strathmore, where the beautiful black soil is perfect for root vegetables. So these Angus carrots previously had just been Angus carrots from this particular farm. But this day, I looked and my hands just stayed quivering above these carrots, because there was something new. These carrots were no longer just carrots. They were no longer carrots from a farm in Angus. They were no longer Scottish carrots. These carrots now were emblazoned with a flag and were crying themselves as Great British carrots. And I thought, this is really weird, because I know that clear provenance is good for sales. I know that Scotland's reputation as an agricultural centre is unrivalled. And I also understand a bit about branding and how important clear brands are. But then I looked around me, and it was kind of like that moment. I don't know if you've ever seen The Matrix, but I had a Keanu Reeves moment. And I looked around me and I thought, Jings, I realised that I was surrounded by more flags than one might reasonably expect to find at a Jubilee street party. And I thought, this is new. And it concerned me because many years ago I was lucky enough to work as a journalist. I was a reporter for the BBC up in Orkney and Shetland, and I was a freelance, but I did a lot of work for them. And I was lucky enough to spend time dealing with a lot of agricultural and fisheries issues. So I get very dewy-eyed if you start talking to me about diamond mesh and square mesh netting and pelagic fleet. Because in all those years, watching Scotland's reputation grow on the world stage, watching Scotland's reputation in particular as a provider of quality food and drink, I knew that Scotland's name for quality sells around the world, and it sells at home too. And so I thought, why? Why would something that is such a selling point suddenly have its labelling change? Because this is not an issue about flag waving. It's not an issue about them versus us. It's an issue of our economy. It's an economic. I mean, you wouldn't get a particular brand of burger going up to another brand of burger and saying, "See they golden arches? They're working fine, but what we're going to do is stick a crown on them. Don't worry about it. Oh, by the way, we're going to change the name as well. Something with king in it. Is that okay?" It wouldn't happen, because you'd have the lawyers on instantly, because brands matter. All the evidence shows that when a shopper enters a supermarket, if they're like me, and most are, it's kind of like a supermarket dash. You want to get in, you want to get out of the fluorescent hell that is before you, so you can go back and throw some food in front of ungrateful children. And you have 6 seconds when a shopper enters an aisle. The research shows you have got 6 seconds to get your product from the shelf into the basket. Now, people like me who are passionate about Scottish butter, I get really nerdy about a lot of stuff, and Scottish butter is one of the top in the world. It's one of the top in the world for the same reason why our Scotch beef is amongst the best in the world. It's because our cattle wander about eating grass. They do the stuff that cows are supposed to do. They swish their tails, they raise their horns, they eat the grass, and they just munch about the place being happy in a pretty good environment, being cared for by farmers who, generally speaking, work really, really hard at animal welfare. And all of that results in healthy animals producing healthy food. Breads, butters, just cheesies, food that you can rely on. So when I go, for example, to buy Scottish butter, because I want to buy Scottish butter because it tastes so good, I actually bought a pat from my local dairy the other day, coming from local cows, and it is just stupendous, the flavour. I have a friend visiting from Malaysia, and she had some bread and butter, and actually the bread was baked by an artisan baker in Perth, and the butter came from the udders of a cow 7 miles away, and she tasted this, and she was, oh my goodness, this is amazing. She staying the night, had come down for a snack and looking for something a bit fancy, and I went, would you like some bread and butter? And she sort of looked at me like I was odd. Why would anybody eat bread and butter? But I gave her this local bread and this local butter, and she ended up having a couple more slices. And then she said, is there cinnamon in this? I went, nope. Just because she was getting flavours coming through that she hadn't experienced from bread and butter before. Now, why, if you can produce something like that from a local farm, nothing fancy, it's just butter, why would you hide that from the world? So I used to buy own brand butter all the time, because all the supermarkets used to do own brand Scottish butter. And it was about October last year, I went again to buy some product, and I went, where's the Scotch butter gone? It's British butter, where's the Scotch butter gone? And it will not surprise you to know that I'm on first name terms with many of the managers in my local supermarkets. and this laddie went, well, it should be Scottish butter. I said, I ken it should be Scottish butter, where's it gone? And he looked, and he went and he sort of did the sort of Wilco 1 2 1 2 in his ear, and he said, it's British butter now. I'll take that label off, because it was labelled as Scottish butter, still on the shelf. That's how new it was. And the explanations come back thick and fast when you write to supermarkets. They say, oh, well, we're no longer designating Scottish milk and Scottish butter separately. It's all going into a communal vat, and so we couldn't possibly tell you. We couldn't possibly tell you where the milk's coming from to make the butter. But I've spoken to people in the dairy industry. The wonderful thing about Scotland's Farm Assured scheme, which incidentally is the first farm assured scheme in the world, and I contend is the best, regardless of what some people with brightly coloured tractors might say, Scotland's Farm Assured scheme is the best because it is from birth through life and into death. The life cycle of this animal is charted, and the code, the barcode they've got on their ear, which identifies them. That means that when a cow, not you obviously, but when a cow goes to get milked and they kind of go past the barcode, the systems in place are so sophisticated that if you've got a mixed herd of Guernseys and Jerseys and Friesians, if you so chose, then you could have the piping going so that the Guernsey milk went to one vat, the Jersey milk went to another vat, and the Frisian milk went to another vat. So if you wished, you could have a mixed herd giving you the butter that you wanted to have. Now that means that it is perfectly possible still to have Scottish butter as Scottish butter. And there are, of course, people like Scottish Pride and Graham's who do a terrific job. I mean, Graham's dairies have, I think, I credit them with practically single-handedly saving the dairy industry in the northeast of Scotland, because they have made marketable, they have sort of, since the demise of the Milk Marketing Board, they have helped support and keep the identity of northeast farmers, keep farming viable. And there are many reasons why this matters. One of them, obviously, is food security. The first duty of any government is to feed its people. And so when I was doing a panel one day with somebody from the National Farmers Union up in Angus, and he said, he's an arable farmer, and he said, he said, of course, DEFRA, that's the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, they are looking at the future of farming, and they are actually looking at letting sectors of farming fail because it is cheaper to import than to support. They're looking at outsourcing arable to the Ukraine. And there was a collective sigh of horror from the audience before us, because in that audience was a gentleman who later came up to me and he said, there have been people farming on my land for 4,500 years. I have the archaeological evidence in my backyard to prove it. And I do not want to be the last. I was chatting to some guys at the Kerry show, in fact, who I also saw up at the Black Isle show. And I kind of was wandering around, hello, what a leaflet. And they were like, really, you're just scaremongering. And I said to him what I had been told, and actually what research I have done later since shows that it is indeed something that is being considered. And I said to them, and what do you think is going to happen to the sale of your £200,000, £300,000 behemoths that you see trundling up and down the fields? What do you think is going to happen to your sales of combine harvesters if we outsource arable to the Ukraine? And that was the point at which they started having a conversation with me about the importance of Scotland's brand and about why it is we should be looking at sustainability and food security. Because it was a couple of years ago now, but the beast from the east, when it came, I don't know what it was like down here, but in Kerry there was a lot of snow. And my supermarket, my little local Cope, looked like the zombie apocalypse had hit. There wasn't, people were buying stuff that, yes, cake in a mug, we're going to buy that because there's nothing to eat for weeks to come. People were really concerned. And it took a long time. It was 3 weeks before the food came back to our shelves. Now, it's my husband, who is a fabulous and compassionate man. He's very patient, as you can imagine, being married to me. He's a patient man. And he made the observation that Kim Jong-un could have sailed up the Forth. As long as he had a pallet of bread and some pints of milk, he'd have been handed the keys to Holyrood, because a hungry people is a vulnerable people. And as I've said many times before, having weapons of mass destruction up the Clyde is not going to protect us from anything. You don't need people threatening us with nuclear weapons back. If we have no food security, you don't need nuclear weapons. You need somebody with a clipboard and a couple more bits of paper going, oh, sorry, this delivery is going to be a wee bit late. Hope you folk don't need bread for a week or two. That is real security. Feeding yourself is real security. Having food and drink on farms nearby that can get to a local population. And in Scotland we're really lucky because the majority of people are never more than 12 miles from a farm. That's food security. If you stop farming land, or if you sell it off for housing, if you stop farming land, within 6 years, the microbiome within that soil has stopped being productive for farming. You have to start again. You have to start working on it again. So losing prime arable is a big issue. And in Scotland, one of the reasons why it is policy for the National Farmers Union that powers, after Brexit, that powers of agriculture come back to Holyrood. That is the National Farmers Union policy, because farmers around Scotland recognise that our situation is very different from that which DEFRA looks at in England. In Scotland, 87% of our land is called least favoured area status. That means it's the kind of thing that grows heather and that you sort of need to be a bit of a goat to kind of jump up and down and get a livelihood of. Highland cows, love it. Wheat, not so much. So 13% of the land that we have in Scotland is of the kind that will grow crops and whether it be barley or turnips. 13%. In England, it's actually almost completely opposite. I think it's 85% is high quality arable and 13% is less favoured, 15% is less favoured area status, which is, you're talking about Yorkshire and the hills, the kind of sort of moor kind of areas. But that means that the priorities that DEFRA has, the understanding that DEFRA have about farming is very different. Also, given that farming in England now is much more sort of industrialised. There's much more of your hedge fund managers and have sort of bought into farming. So it's much less likely to be a family that owns it. It's more likely to be like a business or conglomerate, sort of corporate farming. And they have different pressures on them and tend to go for a different style of farming. In Scotland, if memory serves, I think it is 40% or maybe 56%, if I remember my stats right, there's one of them, are predominantly family-owned farms. And the average household income, now there's a guy called Jim Fairley who is brilliant. Jim knows farming in a really intricate way. He's really good with his facts and his stats. And every time I say this, he goes, Ruth, no, you've got to stop saying the stat, because there's no farmer I know earning that kind of money. But it is a statistic which the National Farmers Union has released as being an accurate statistic, and that is that the average household average household income from farming is £26,400. Now bear in mind that's an average. You're talking about the Duke of Buccleuch at one end and somebody with 3 cows at the other. So I agree with Jim, it probably is less, but that is a figure. But even with that figure, that is not a lot of money in farming. We're not looking at farmers always being people who are sort of driving around in Range Rovers, don't have a clue of the pressures of life. Most farmers work really, really hard for very little income to make sure that quality food gets onto our plates. So why is this sort of great British branding happening when Scotland has got this terrific product? In 2011, David Cameron had an idea. Now, as the ideas from David Cameron go, this was not the worst he's ever had. Hey, everyone! So he decided that with the Olympics coming, he would kind of buy into this cool Britannia, like Spice Girls and double-decker buses and Boris Johnson up a zip wire. And so he came up with the whole thing, sort of like, Britain is great. And that actually is a pretty good branding exercise. I do think that he was onto something with it. DEFRA then, he was roundly mocked in the Telegraph for it. And DEFRA didn't do so much about it, but the Department for International Trade sort of went with it a bit. So, sort of castles are great. And then something in 2014 must have happened to make them think that they would resurrect it. And resurrect it they did. And so the Department for International Trade started putting forward, like, the Kelpies are great. Just sort of throwing out more and more products which might be good for London, but wouldn't be particularly helpful for Scotland, because as a marketing strategy, and I can tell this from personal experience, when you are overseas, I lived in Malaysia for many years, and if I said to people I was British, they'd go, oh, London. Oh, no, Scottish. And they'd go, oh, and they'd look at me, and this dates me a little, they would smile and they'd say Braveheart. And now, of course, it would be Jamie. They would have visions of Jamie sort of floating through the heather and get a bit dewy-eyed about it. But that is, in that one kind of exchange, which was repeated many, many times when I was in Malaysia, it made me realise then that how interchangeable and how much of an issue this must be for people across England as well. If you say Britain, people think London. It must be very hard to build a brand that is an English brand which relies on people recognising England as being more than just the London eye. So occasionally I get a cheesemonger. There's a cheesemonger in Cornwall who occasionally contacts me because he's deeply concerned about the Great British Campaign, because it is losing his Cornish brand. The farmers in Kentish strawberries. First time I ever had Kentish strawberries, true story, was at the Wimbledon's men's finals, and I had my first pins and I had Kentish strawberries, and they were awesome. And your Norfolk asparagus, and there are places around England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland which have got tremendous local provenance and really good reputations, and those brands are hard fought and hard won. And when at the Common Select Committee, James Withers, the CEO of Scotland Food and Drink, and Johnny Hall of the National Farmers Union, when they were asked what they thought about the Great British Campaign, and how effective it was. One of them said it rides roughshod over the work that we have done for developing Scotland's brand. Because Scotland's brand is an international success story. People look at Scotland's brand and go, wow, you guys have done tremendously. 1 in 5 people in Scotland are employed in a food and drink related sector in some way, whether it be a lorry driving the food and drink to somewhere, somebody making a sandwich to sell to somebody else, food and drink tourism, or farmers or beekeepers, as we have in our midst now. Food and drink employs in some way or another 1 in 5 adults in Scotland, and they're looking for that to be 1 in 4 by 2030. That's a phenomenal boost. And when you think that back in the days of BSE, when suddenly people thought feeding cows to their grannies, to their granddaughters, and put rather than feeding just grass, as we like to do in Scotland, the rendering industry went a bit nuts. They decided, because the price of fuel was so high, they asked for permission to reduce the temperatures at which produce was rendered, and then the feed that the dead animals that they were putting into the feed to feed to vegetarian animals. Suddenly, surprise, surprise, it turns out that's not a good idea, and BSE came onto the scene, and overnight was threatened to destroy Scotland's beef industry. Overnight, farmers started going out of business. The plug was pulled, understandably, by countries going, we don't want any of that. So some farmers got together and they decided on, how are we going to do this? How do we get confidence back into the system? And they came up with the Farm Assured Scheme, which meant that people would know exactly the provenance of the food they were getting. And it was within 6 months, I think every slaughterhouse and butcher had signed up to it, if memory serves, and most of the farmers across Scotland, to the point now that there are very, very few. It tends to be smallholders who just want to have a sheep for their own use, or a cow to keep them through the year, that aren't using the Farm Assured Scheme. That is phenomenal, and with that came an international interest. People started looking at what Scotland had to offer. And then the campaign, Scotland the Brand, came in. And so Keep Scotland the Brand, the campaign that I started, is in homage to what I think is one of the best food branding, not just food branding, but the Scottish branding campaigns, because Scotland is the brand. Scotland the Brand, it takes into account tourism, it takes into account textiles, it takes into account engineering, medicine. I mean, we as a nation are recognised for being a nation of innovators and all about quality. So when the Kenyans decided that they wanted to develop a potato, because quite frankly everything in life comes back to vegetables, when the Kenyans decided that they wanted to develop a potato that was going to feed their people, be suitable for their climate, provide a source of income, they sort of looked around the world and said, well, where can we go? What can we do? And they looked at Scotland, because Scotland's reputation as a seed potato exporter is unrivalled. The Dutch are really keen to rival us, and we will find out that to our cost if there's a no-deal Brexit and tariffs on our exports go up. So Morocco, for example, would have to pay 40% more for our tatties. It's not going to happen. So the Dutch are actually really keen on there being a no-deal Brexit, because their exports are going to just go through the roof. So the Kenyans looked at Scotland's seed potatoes, and one of the reasons our seed potatoes are so good is because our weather is so rubbish. So this beautiful black soil gets really cold in the winter, lots of snow, and that means that most years the nasty bugs and beasties that are in the soil that could promote disease are kept in check. We also have an extremely diligent science base, agricultural science base, that checks the soil and checks the tatties. And we have a farming base which is very professional, and they work with the scientists. So everybody knows what's happening with the potatoes. We've got tatty rogers who check the potatoes. So by the time a potato is exported to, for example, Kenya, the farmers buying it know that they are buying a disease-free quality product. And there's not a lot of places in the world that can give those guarantees in the way that Scotland does. So the Kenyans looked around and went, Scotland, we'll have you. Ask me your tatties, let's get some of your scientists and your farmers out and let's get busy. So then they thought, ooh, we'd like, let's get a potato institute to go with this tatty creation. And it was the architect in Glam, it was the wee village that I look across onto, that got the contract for developing this Kenyan Potato Institute. Now, the reason why it matters for us to be aware of our brand, 80% of the seed potatoes exported from the United Kingdom come from Scotland. When the Tatties project in Kenya was declared a success, you go online, you will see half of the papers describe it as a great British success story. Now, I do not begrudge the tatty farmers in Kent or Jersey or Yorkshire their successes. I wish them all the very best. But if you're talking market share, if you're talking about a great British success story, there's nothing to stop an external importer looking, well, if it's all the same, we'll go down there. That's not the point. The point is, it's a Scottish success story, it's our success story, let's get some of that back. And also for our reputation. We don't want our reputation to be sullied by substandard seed tatties, quite frankly. So when I was down at Westminster giving evidence, it was a busy week, and I was very pleased because the Scottish Farmer, which is a very august publication, they wrote a good wee bit of blurb about the event. And in that same week, they had a story about the Kenyans and the seed potatoes. And one of the journalists contacted me and said, oh, we really like what you're doing. Really interesting. Is there anything, have you got any comments that you would like to make? And I went, aye, how about when the Scottish Farmer is talking about a Scottish tatty seed success story? You don't call it a great British success story in your headline. Let's do the right thing by Scottish farmers and give them their market share. And I mean, the Scottish Farmer is very fair. It's a very fair newspaper. And I think that it's just, people just get into, you've got the Great British Bake Off, and you've got, Spitfires at every turn. Dainty Lynn will be pumping out through the supermarkets before you know it. And I think people are just sort of getting sucked into this insidious subsuming of our brand. And I think that there are many reasons why it matters that we keep Scotland the brand. It's about our food security, it's about our market share, it's about our tourism. So when I lived in Malaysia, I was lucky enough to be friends with a gentleman who ran a very upmarket supermarket. And we became friends because it was actually over Orkney cheese, which is a PGI, by the way. And I had noticed that on his shelves there was Scotch beef and there was Scotch lamb and Orkney cheese. And I went, oh, can you get smoked cheese? And he went, oh, I didn't know they did smoked cheese. And so we got chatting. And he said, where are you from? And I said Britain, and he said London, and I said Scotland. And he went, oh, Braveheart. And we got talking about Orkney cheese. And now this gentleman, when I used to give my kids water, for example, I would buy, you don't want to be drinking water just out the streams of Malaysia. So I would buy reverse osmosis, big water cooler bottles of water. And they were about 12 ringgit for a bottle of water. That's about £12, I guess. No, that's a lie. It was less. It was 4 ringgit 50. I tell a lie. If I bought 2, then you could get, anyway. So I would buy these big water coolers of water, and I always had several of them sitting in the house just in case. Now, to give you some context about the value of Scotland's brand, this gentleman would sell Scottish water, and he had a sign on his shelf, a wee litre of Scottish water, which was about 16 ringgit, which you're talking a big, there's a big difference. And beside his water, he had a sign up, Scottish water, filtered for 10,000 years by Scots granite. And that's the power of Scotland's brand. he had a bidder who would do the online bidding for the first line-caught salmon of the season. And he would clear all this amazing, to my eyes, exotic, beautiful fish off his shelves and clear it for the first salmon. He would have it flown out overnight to have it on his shelf or his ice the next day. And people would come and they would sort of argue over who was going to buy. He could sell that for a lot of money because there are very well-heeled people in Kuala Lumpur. And so when you're looking at Scotch, for example, people love Scotch. And they might think about having a Scottish evening. They might sort of sit and go, well, let's put a box set of Outlander on and we'll have some salmon and we'll have some Scotch whisky and maybe we'll go over there on holiday. And when people come for thousands of miles on holiday, that's cost them thousands of pounds to come on holiday. When they go back, they don't want to take some tat that's been made in China back with them. They're looking for Scottish produce. So when they go into shops, they're looking for local artisan products. They're looking for probably something that's a bit upmarket and probably a bit expensive to take back for their friend. They want those little knickknacks or those jewels, the items of jewellery or clothing that they can give as gifts, and they're looking for Scotland's brand. It's basic. You do the same, I'm sure. When you're on holiday, you're looking for local stuff. And so that's the point. Scotland's brand, our international reputation, it's good for business. So when on World Whisky Day, I swear I felt faint. World Whisky Day a couple of years ago, and I saw that it was again this year, they did the same. The Glengoyne Distillery, this beautiful picture of the vaults, and you've got a cooper sort of looking moody in the background, and big barrels, and it's all sepia and peaty, and there's a dram being pulled from a distance, and they've got written across it, "Whisky is Great Britain and Northern Ireland." And I looked and I thought, what are they playing at? Why would you do that? But one of the reasons why I started this campaign off is because my spidey senses had been tingling, and it all came together with this carrot episode. Because previously, a few weeks before that, I had been the Farmer Jonesy podcast. If you're into farming, Farmer Jonesy podcast, he's really good. And he'd had a thing about a headline which said, "Outrage from Scotch beef, Scotch lamb farmers." Now, it's very hard to get a farmer outraged. You might hear them grumbling all the time. But outrage, I thought, oh, outrage, a bit perky for a farmer. So I went and had a look. And the reason that they were outraged, and the reason why I have spent a year and a half of my life pounding away at this issue, is because as part of the Japan-EU CETA trade talks, which have just gone through as of December last year, we now trade with 1/3 of the world's GDP. And the Mercosur talks, which are going on, which involve South America, I have yet to discover what's happening with that. But the point is, the precedent has been set. During the Japan-Canada-EU trade talks, the reason why Scotch beef, Scotch lamb farmers were outraged was because as part of the European Union, Westminster has the care of our PGI, Protected Geographic Indicators. Now those are things like your Norfolk turkeys, your Arbroath Smokies, your Scotch beef, your Scotch lamb, Melton Mowbray pies, a number of products, 86 products across the whole of the United Kingdom, and 17 of those are in Scotland. There's more pending, there are more applications have been put in, but 17 we have pen at the moment. And that means that if a piece of Scotch beef, that means that somebody selling beef within the European Union, or as part of this, somebody who's a signatory to the trade deal, cannot sell beef that they call Scotch beef. So the Scotch Whisky Association, they have their own PGI. They very successfully saw off a German distiller who had the word Glen in their whisky name. So anything which implies provenance, which they cannot, if you've got a protected geographic indicator, the provenance is protected. And during the European Canada trade talks, the European Union, the continent of Europe, the nations across the continent of Europe, put forward 3,000 food names for protection. The United Kingdom did not put forward one. So that means that as things stand with our current trade deal with Canada and Japan, across the European Union, the makers of prosciutto ham, feta cheese, champagne, all of those names are protected. Scotch beef, Scotch lamb are not. And I bumped into Lord Duncan, Baron Springbank, Ian Duncan, one of the Mr. Mandel's sidekicks at the Scottish office, or the Office for the Great Britain in Scotland, or whatever it's called now. And I bumped into him, and give the man his due, he was paying for petrol at Perth, at Broxton Roundabout. I saw an opportunity and I took it, and he handled it with dignity and aplomb. So I went up to him and went, "Oh, Mr. Duncan, or Lord Duncan, what are you going to do to protect Scotland's PGI produce in the future?" And he kind of looked at me and he went, "Well, of course, we will do everything we can to ensure that Scotland's products are protected." And I said, but you've got previous, because in the Japan UCITA trade talks, you did not submit one product name for protection. And he looked at me and he kind of sneered a little, "It's never a good idea, I don't like that." And he went, "Well, the Canadians don't like PGI." And I said, "They liked it enough to sign up for 3,000 names across the rest of Europe. Why would you not protect our names?" And he sort of muttered something, and there's only so far you could take a conversation in the crisp aisle, and I offered him the opportunity to meet in chambers later, which is yet to be taken up on, and we have, give him his credit, had a conversation on Twitter since, and he said to email him, and I have, if you're listening, I have emailed, and there's nothing back yet, but you're still welcome to get in touch. So I am yet to be convinced that our food names will be protected. Now, why does that matter? Well, if we're only trading in the UK, well, why does it matter? Well, part of the reason it matters is because the US has, for many years, and Australia and others, have made clear that they view Scotland's food names as something as a barrier to trade, which may well explain why the National Farmers Union policy is for the Scottish Government to protect our agricultural industry, and the Westminster policy is for them to take such matters under their aegis. And this is actually a really fundamentally important point, because there was an article recently in the Press and Journal out of Aberdeen which said that the estimate is 21,500 farms could go out of business in Scotland after Brexit. And there are a number of reasons why this matters. One of them is the sustainability and viability of our communities, and it is one of the reasons why I started this campaign, is because a year and a half ago, when I looked at the evidence before me, I realised that my agricultural community could go the way of the miners. And that seriously concerns me. I am hearing from more and more farmers who are getting rid of cattle because there's literally talk about bonfires of livestock after Brexit, because people don't know if they're going to be able to sell it or not. Because, and bear with me because it does get a little complicated, and I will try and keep it less rambly than sometimes I can veer into. If the Americans get, for example, the trade deal they want, and the Australians have made clear that they're waiting for the Americans to soften us up before they come in for a bash. The Americans have given evidence, and it's recorded, you can watch it if you are so inclined, which say that they want for our food standards not to be a barrier to trade, that they view the European food standards that we currently enjoy as standard, as, what's the phrase they keep using? They want to return to a science-based approach. Now, basically, that is the same approach that the tobacco industry used for many years. When many people for decades were saying tobacco causes cancer, and the tobacco industry went, prove to us that this is so. So the European approach to food is prove to me it's safe. The American approach to food is prove to me it's dangerous. Now, this really, really matters, because American rates of food poisoning are 10 times higher per head of population than we have. There was a recall of meat recently which saw, I think it was 150 tons of meat, 150,000 tons of meat being recalled across 10 states because people were dying from food poisoning. And there's kind of really nasty hemorrhagic versions of E. coli happening because America does farms on an industrial scale. So you're not talking about herds of cattle wandering across the prairies. You're talking about sort of large sheds full of cattle being fed on corn, which does terrible things to a cow's digestive tract. And because of the intensity, because they're being pumped full of growth hormones, which aren't legal in the European Union because they've been shown to cause cancers, which the Americans say isn't science-based, then these cattle have rollicking diarrhea. And then they come to be slaughtered, but the slaughterhouse techniques are different than in the EU. So as part of the European Union, it is the case that you have to have a vet in place examining every animal and examining every carcass, and you have to have a distance between livestock so that it reduces. As a vegetarian, I campaign for mobile abattoirs and for better abattoirs and for more abattoirs because I think we owe it to our livestock to have a positive and as humane an end of life experience as is possible. And I've been in abattoirs. I've been in the abattoir up in Orkney, which was phenomenal. I was so impressed with it, and I think that's what we should. The animal goes in, doesn't know what's happening. It can dark corridor into the light. Before you know it, the cow behind it can't see what's happening. Before you know it, thunk through the head and it's all gone. So to me, that's pretty cruelty free. American livestock and abattoirs don't get that same. And there's a distance between the slaughterhouse. So the cow goes in, gets the chop, and viscera are removed, and it's all sort of clean and everything's taken care of, and you've got a clean carcass at the end of it. It's all about keeping carcasses disease free and taint free. So basically, I don't want poop on meat, and nor should you. But that doesn't happen in America, which is the reason why they wash their livestock, like they wash, for example, chickens in chlorine. It's not, I get people sometimes going, oh, you get more chlorine in if you got the swimming pool. I'm like, yes, but there's less poo. So the point is, that the reason chicken is chlorinated, it's not the chlorine that's the issue. It's the reason why they are chlorinating it. So what happens is you get your livestock being sort of trundled through on this very fast factory line, and in order for everything to be cheap and fast and bigger and better, and you've got, it's like, just imagine Freddy Krueger making sausages, that's kind of where we're at. So you're looking at viscera and contamination, and that's why food poisoning is so high. And on top of that, for example, the growth hormones. Now, in the United Kingdom, we don't do that. In the United Kingdom, we have a fairly an animal welfare approach. Is what predominantly is the main feature of the slaughterhouse system. So I was concerned when a year ago, just back in a year past December, under English Votes for English Laws, the English government decided to do away with animal sentience as being a part of law. So under law, in Scotland, we say animals have feelings. Now, if you say that an animal has feelings under law, that means that you have to treat it in a particular way. One of those ways means that there's a vet there acting as a death doula as you shuffle off your motor coil to make sausages. There's somebody there to make sure that you are cared for, that you're not being mistreated. So English Votes for English Laws took animal sentience out of the statute book. Said, nah, it's okay, animals don't have feelings. But, and here was the clever bit, Mr. Gove assured everybody that although we were taking the laws away, it didn't mean we were going to use them in ways that were going to mean that animals were less treated. So you kind of think, well, why? If you're taking them away, anyway. So one of the problems, though, is that with Brexit, if we lose the continental Europeans who bring their skills to our shores, over 90% of the vets that work in abattoirs making sure that our livestock is well cared for come from the continent of Europe. So one of the thoughts is, and I know this to be the case from conversations I've had with those who know, that the reason that animal sentience has been removed is so that it would be possible then to change the rules to take vets out of the abattoirs, make things a bit cheaper, get other people in, maybe train some environmental health people up. The next day after this law was passed in England, the National Farmers Union of Scotland went chapping the door at Holyrood to say, we want animal sentience. It is a key part of animal welfare and our farm assured scheme. Now, one of the functions that these vets do is they guddle about in the viscera of the livestock. One of the things that the Americans, and I have watched them saying it, that they want to get rid of it, it's got a fancy name, but basically it's the pig heart incision. And one of the reasons why this matters is one of the reasons why pork is a prescribed meat in many of the world's faiths. In the Middle East, there's a particular kind of vicious tapeworm that migrates around the body. And it is thought that perhaps in Leviticus and others, that's the reason why they said don't eat pork, is because they recognised there was a link between the two. That's one theory behind it. So the pig heart incision, and it happens with other livestock too, they go in, have a wee guddle about, make sure that there's not a cyst in the pig's heart and other parts of its body, to make sure that, because this is an indication that there's a tapeworm which has migrated. Now, tapeworm have got a really fascinating life cycle, but you don't want them in your bacon. Because if they're in your meat and that meat is undercooked, then that tapeworm could begin its migration around your body. And there was a poor young gentleman in India who died last month, 2 months ago. He died with cysts in his brain and his groin because he had eaten meat which had been undercooked, which had not had the benefit of our high farm assured slaughter techniques as is prescribed, as is the case in the EU. Now, one of the things that concerns me, and one of the reasons why I spend so much of my time on this campaign, is because I live in a rural community. I don't want my community to fail. I don't want to look out on the hills and see that the farms around me have been bought up by hedge fund managers and land bankers and Russian oligarchs who fancy being a laird for this month. I don't want to see my traditional environment being bought up and suddenly fences going up around and being told that I can't walk on my land. And because things have changed and perhaps it's going to be an industrial forestry or something, that they'll come up with a reason why it's not possible to stravage over my hills. I particularly want for Scotland's brand to continue being successful, not only for our economy, not only so that we can continue to have livestock which are kept in a healthy and animal cruelty-free way, but I'm particularly exercised by the fact that currently, regardless of whether or not you can buy something fancy at the farmer's market, or Waitrose with a Falderoy on top, or if you are one of those poor souls who, although you work hard at several jobs on 0 hours contracts and with few rights, you are working hard, but you can't afford to feed your family, so you are pushed into the indignity in one of the richest countries of the world of going begging for your meal, and are presented with a box filled with own brand produce, regardless of whether you are eating a tin of own brand peas or something organic raised by hand that's got a name on it. The quality of that food, the quality of the sauce might be a little different, but the standard is the same. And the Americans, for example, have made clear that they do not want there to be any labelling on food which allows us, and I have this as a direct quote from somebody who spoke to the American ambassador. This gentleman phoned me up and he said, Ruth, forget Keep Scotland the brand. The US ambassador, who I had dinner with last night, wants us to get rid of UK the brand. They do not want us, and I quote, to discriminate. They don't want labels that would enable shoppers to discriminate against their produce. It has been made very clear there is multiple evidence out there to show that the US are determined that if they get a deal, that will include food and food standards. They want our standards to come down to theirs, and they want it to be integrated into food in such a way that you don't know what you're eating. They did that with GMO soy. When GMO soy was brought in, many people in the US said, we don't like GM, and they went, oh, you know what we're going to do? Let's just mix everything in together. So there you go, GM soy, and you can't possibly, it's like with the Scottish butter and the British butter. Oops, we couldn't possibly work out how to make it separate, although we quite frankly could. So there are many reasons why I would like you to keep Scotland the brand and to think about this issue and to talk to people about it. It's jobs, it's our communities, it's the quality of the food on your plate, it's our health service. There are so many reasons. I would ask you please to keep Scotland the brand. Thank you.
I believe we're going to have a question and answer session, Ruth, so I'm sure that has certainly raised questions for me. Does anybody want to start off and ask a question?
Can I ask a question about fishing? Now, I'm vague on this, it's just how my son asked me this today when I told him I was coming here. He's very keen fishing, and he said there was I've just come back from holiday, so I haven't seen this programme. He's told me to watch and catch up. Panorama seemingly had a programme on it about fish farms and great concerns about like the River Tay. Normally there's a fantastic catch there. You're talking about the beginning of the season, and last year in 2000 it was only four fish or something that was caught because of what the fish farms are doing. And seemingly in Norway they have some sort of, you might talk to netting there, this is what you're just talking about, where the faeces from the fish farm, it's just killing off so that the rod and line people can't catch. And it's just, people are very much for your Scottish fish, and farm fish or fresh fish, that's also a bit of a anomaly, isn't it? So where do you stand with that, or how can that be solved?
So this has been an issue now for decades. When I was working up in Shetland in the 1990s, we were interviewing the fish farmers about sea lice. It's sea lice in particular that are the issue, because fish that are kept within a particular kind of density are prone to sea lice, and they will shift the nets around and about to move them a bit, but there's, in my mind, little doubt that the sea lice and the density is a real issue. I've spoken to a number of, I've got friends who've got boats that are collect shellfish, so they go and they dive down into the Orkney waters and collect the shellfish by hand. So it's really sustainable, rather than the old days when they would sort of dredge it all up. And they say that you can see, depending on what way the current's coming, you can see the effect of the pesticides that are being used on the fish farms, and this is an issue for them. Now, I know that the Scottish Government, just because I've been following the progress of it, I know that the Scottish Government has, last year, they closed a consultation about this issue, and they are meant to be coming out. In fact, I think
I think there was an announcement within about a week of this programme being on television about it. The Scottish Government was looking at it, but I think Norway deal with it quite well, but it's very expensive, and I'm just wondering if it's something that maybe hopefully our government might support, because we would have Scotland the brand if this continues, will it?
So I believe that there is meant to be an announcement being made shortly that up until now, and ironically most of the companies are Norwegian owned in Scotland, but I understand that the Scottish Government is looking to, rather than, up until now there has been something, it's like a code of conduct, a voluntary code of conduct, and I believe that the Scottish Government is looking at putting in legislation for systems. From what I have read, and I'm no expert on this at all, I mean, I'm no expert in anything, I'm just going to read about stuff. What I understand is that the correlation with the wild salmon appears to be the strain that they are being put under by the sea lice. And I think that that's a huge issue. In fact, just today on the Keep Scotland the Brand Twitter feed, I was putting out about that quality has to mean quality, and sustainability has to, I mean, if Scotland's brand is to mean anything, it has to be quality and it has to be welfare. So I am very keen to see what the Scottish Government comes out with. It has been, I suspect the reason that the Panorama programme was timed in the way that it was is because they know that the consultation has come to an end and that legislation is pending. So I think, yes, it's an issue. It has been an issue which has been well known within the industry for many years. I mean, the Clyde Fishing or Fishermen's Association have been very vocal about this, as have others. So I hope that the Scottish Government comes up with something constructive, because if not, how can you have a seafood industry based on quality which sort of feeds off the purity of the marine environment if you're poisoning it with pesticides? So I think that in the same way that obviously you've got an animal welfare issue with the fish as well, but in the same way, going on to land, strawberries, Scottish soft fruit. I was speaking to the buyer for Spar, who says that he can't believe the way in which so many supermarkets cover Scottish fruit as British fruit, because he says we don't put fruit on the shelves until the Scottish fruit comes into season. And I've spoken to the manager of one of the local supermarkets, who tells me that the Great British Campaign on Scottish fruit, he said it's not an economic decision that people are doing this, because he said, I've told my managers time and time again, I can sell twice the quantity of fruit if it is Scottish fruit than if it is Great British fruit. So it's not an economic decision they're doing. The evidence from the Scotland Food and Drink shows that in London, the 25-year-olds to 35-year-olds are more likely to buy a product if it is Scottish soft fruit rather than from anywhere else within the United Kingdom. But that quality is only quality if the strawberries have flavour. I mean, traditionally, the reason why Scotland's soft fruit was the best in the world, and it was the best in the world, was because in the old days, when you had one season, and it kind of came to a peak in the middle, the reason was because our long, slow, rubbish summers meant that the fruits very slowly developed a high sugar content, which gave you a terrific flavour and a really genuine flavour. But if you're looking at produce which is hot-housed and doesn't come out of the land, and there's another issue from a gentleman who used to be the general manager for Angus Soft Fruits, tells me that one of the biggest problems that they have with these polytunnels is getting the pollinators, and Mr. Apiarist in the background will know about this, getting the pollinators to go into the polytunnels. He said the difference is you can open them all up and let the pollinators in, but the pollinators prefer those fruits which are grown in the earth than the fruits which are grown in grow bags. He said, so there must be something lacking in the grow bags. So you've got that aspect, all this kind of health properties of soft fruit. But the other thing is, I don't want to buy beautiful big strawberries from Scotland that taste like turnips. So quality has to mean quality, whether it's salmon in the marine environment or whether it is our soft fruits. We can't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. If Scotland's name, and currently I truly believe the evidence shows, it's not just a belief system, it's this, the evidence shows that Scotland's reputation and name for quality actually means something, but that can only mean something if you continue it. You don't decide just to cash in. And that's one of the reasons why, when I was at a recent meeting with farmers and farming leaders in Stirling talking about Brexit and the future of farming, and one farmer, understandably concerned, said to me, said to the panel, well, if the Americans want to come in and put growth hormones in their meat, well, I'm just going to compete by putting growth hormones in my meat. And everyone went, well, no, don't do that, because we will never be able to compete on the stack 'em high, sell 'em low. It always has to be quality. And the other thing is, under WTO rules, if one of the reasons why it is National Farmers Union policy for us to remain within the single market and the common market is because under WTO rules, the number of sheep, for example, the number of sheep available to trade on the international market on a no-deal scenario, all the farmers in the world who are not like the Somalians and the North Koreans and all those other people who don't have deals in the World Trade Organization, a very small and not select club, the number of sheep available for our farmers to compete with is the equivalent of the number of sheep up 2 Angus glens. And that is why they talk about there perhaps having to be mass slaughters and bonfires of livestock, is because if we have a cliff edge no deal Brexit, you're looking potentially at the end of livestock farming or upland hill farming, for sure, because people will not be able to sell their produce or their livestock. I digress slightly, but you sort of get the wider picture.
Sorry, I was going to say, you're here talking to us just now, and you obviously do this a lot to other groups. This is maybe going to sound naive, but are the Scottish press in any way concerned or interested in putting this information out in our press, in our newspapers?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I had a journalist from one of Scotland's most popular newspapers. It's the newspaper with the highest sales in Scotland. And he had a long conversation with me. He contacted me one day after I'd been down at Westminster giving evidence, and he said how important it was because his market is in a rural area, and then decided not to pursue it. But for sure, the agricultural papers are up on it. You occasionally see over the Guardian, for example, they do quite a lot. George Monbiot. He or Monbiot, anyway, they do quite a lot that's very informed about it. I think part of the problem, I mean, having been a journalist working in Scotland, part of the problem now is that many of the journalists actually don't really do the kind of journalism that was done in the past. A lot of journalism now relies on news agencies, and if there is a story which requires a lot of thought and consideration, they just don't have the sort of levels of comprehension to sort of be able to do it justice beyond the sort of knee-jerk nonsense. There have been journalists who have handled the story and who've spoken to me and have handled the story very well and very fairly, and I think that is to be welcomed. But I am pleased to announce that I am the latest columnist for Farming Scotland magazine, which might not be great shakes to folk who don't know about it, but actually this magazine is in every slaughterhouse and livestock mart. No, not slaughterhouse. That's a lie. It's in not slaughterhouse. Sorry, it is in every livestock mart and in many of the agricultural businesses. It's available there. So for reaching people who are within the industry, there's real interest. The Scottish farmer does a lot of work, not just with me, but I mean, they do a lot talking about this as an issue. So within the industry, there's a lot of awareness.
Have the National not offered you a column, Ruth?
To be honest, because this campaign is politically neutral, I would be loath to take a column were they to ask me, and they haven't asked me, so I'm not sort of like but I think that papers like the National have been extremely strong advocates for Scotland's brand, and they do a lot of work about Scotland's brand. But actually, the thing that I find very heartening is this campaign started at my kitchen table. It literally started because my wee page, which I think about 200 people would look at in a month, it was mainly just sort of me ranting. And I put something up about strawberries, and I had 30,000 people coming and looking at this and commenting on it. And I went, oh, it's not just me then. And so I started sort of talking more about it and producing more facts and making accessible. It's quite technical thing, about Scotch beef, and making those facts accessible to people in a way that perhaps they would take on board. And And that was how the campaign started. I kind of came up with this hashtag and just started using it, and it sort of took off. And then I was standing outside the farmers market in Forfar with a colleague, and because they wouldn't let us in, and he went, "We need leaflets." And then about literally a week later, I got a phone call from a guy up in Peterhead who went, your campaign, we need leaflets. and he helped us sort of get this. So the campaign, actually, the leaflet here before you was born out of speaking to farmers and people within the industry and people around Scotland. There's about 7 or 8 different sources of input into it. And then it was crowdfunded, and it has been distributed entirely by volunteers. And what the leaflets before me now represent part of 600,000 leaflets which are out across Scotland. 90% of the households in Ross and Sutherland have been leafleted. I mean, there's phenomenal response to this campaign. And because of the grassroots campaign and the conversations that people are having with supermarkets and emailing people and emailing supermarkets, I have noticed, and it gladdens my heart, I have noticed more and more supermarkets talk about supporting Scottish producers. More and more supermarkets. I was speaking to a very cherubic young gentleman at a food and drink conference who was telling me that he's a provider he supplies supermarkets with soft fruits. And I gave him one of my leaflets. I mean, ooh, he said, it's really funny, for 2 years, all anybody wanted was Great British fruit, and now they're all gone back to Scottish fruit. There's only one that wants Great British fruit. Everybody else wants Scottish fruit. And I thought, and that is the power of people. That is the power of people talking and speaking to supermarkets. In fact, the same week, a gentleman sidled up to me outside the farmers market. And he said, "Are you the reason I'm getting all these emails?" I went, "Oh, I do hope so." and this gentleman was this GM of this soft fruit company, and he said that they were being inundated with emails about this issue. And then, to their credit, the Forfar Farmers Market, I went and I had a meeting with them, and I presented them with the evidence that I had. I sent them an email with links to these different technical papers and documents and talking about what was going on, and they allowed me into the mart, and they have put up posters, and they are aware about it because they recognise the risk to Scotland's brand, and they recognise what's going to happen. But the clincher, I suspect, to be honest, it wasn't just the Farmer Sure scheme going down the toilet, it was the arable, because they sell grain as well. So they now, because this campaign is party neutral, because this campaign is not about the Constitution, because this campaign is for everybody, because we all have to eat regardless of our outlook, and I really stick to that as a point of ethical principle. I am welcomed in the marts, and I go around the marts and get a lot of conversations with people, and it is very heartening, actually, the level of understanding and awareness within the industry, and there is growing awareness amongst ordinary everyday shoppers who have nothing to do with agriculture, but it's down to people like you guys to get the message out there.
Could I just ask, I know the supermarkets are the kind of meeting place of the consumers and the people producing, but within, you're saying here that you've been well received, and it's non-political, but there must be people that are farming that are of a political persuasion that they don't actually care if it's got a Union Jack sticker on. And there's the case in point with the potatoes, the red, is it they're produced in Scotland, but he was the first that allowed a British flag to be put in it. Is it I can't remember the guy's name, but is it and that caused a bit of a storm. That was a number of years ago, and he was quite happy for the British flag to be on his potatoes. So there must be also people in the industry that don't actually care whether it carries, how it's been branded. There must be some that are quite happy for it, and that could be a political reasoning behind them as well.
I was just going to say that is why Ruth is having to do this job instead of the Scottish Farmer and the National Farmers Union doing the bloody job. Because I'll tell you, we've got another name for them. I'm a farmer myself, and when you were on about BSE, Holland's still riddled with it, and so is half the United States, but you don't see it in the news or anything. They don't broadcast it. I know it is. And when it did hit Britain as a whole, McDonald's was the first. We used Dutch beef, but I was one of the young farmers. Well, I wasn't young at that time, but we boycotted and barricaded all the McDonald's at the time because we were using Dutch beef, and it was riddled with BSE. So, really, I went off the track. The National Farmer, the Scottish National Farmers Union, should be doing your job, Ruth.
Well, to give them their...
Really, and the Scottish Farmer. The Scottish Farmer, I've no faith in them for your side of it whatsoever. They'll say one thing and do another and print another.
Do you mean from a political point?
Yes, they do. Been there. I envy what you're doing. It's a great job, and I just wish we know the answer to deal with the problem, but that is political.
So to give them their due, the National Farmers Union has been extremely helpful in making sure that this campaign is accurately informed, and have been very open to if I approach them and say, so for example, when I was down at Westminster, giving evidence, and they were the ones who made sure that I had accurate information, as were Quality Meat Scotland. So I, in fairness to them, I have to say that they have ensured that the content of this campaign, I have access to accurate information, which is in the public domain, but they're just making sure, if I have a question, they will say, or look at this, or look at that.
But surely that is something that the Scottish Farmer and the NFU should be dealing with on Country File or Landlord, and they're not. You never hear a thing.
Well, it's I can't comment on
political.
that. Yeah. So what is interesting? I make a point with the campaign. Obviously, I've been really strong in emphasising that this is not a boycott campaign. Positive purchasing is one thing, but it's not about boycotts, because rural communities need rural jobs. And if a company wants to portray their produce privately in one way, that's up to them. However, I as a consumer have the right to contact them and say, why don't you think about keeping Scotland the brand? What is interesting is that Bartlett's also have Scotty's brand. And Scotty's produce. Now, I always buy Scotty's peas. If I'm going to buy tatties, I get my tatties from the farmer's market, or I have a veg box delivered by a local farmer. So I do my best to source locally. Scotty's produce is out there. And in fact, Scotty's has just recently been awarded a contract by Asda to supply all of their soft fruit and veg. So it is interesting to see that the Scotty brand is very successful. And I think the economics of that sometimes are hard to argue with.
But I think it's interesting, although it's political, but it is even what you're saying there. Some of it's also market driven rather than sort of cultural driven.
The bottom line for most businesses is money. And even a certain northeastern fisherman who is known for having particular leanings very publicly, I am assured by fish merchants when he's at market, make sure that all of his produce is covered in salt tires so that people can see it comes from Scotland, because the Scottish brand sells. Now, interestingly enough, I had a meeting with the Scottish Government's food and drink team to talk over some ideas and issues and sort of make a representation to them, and they were very generous in giving me and a couple of people, a farmer and a fisherman, time to talk about this issue again, to make sure that once people realise that this campaign was a grassroots movement and that I was trying to approach it in an ethical way, but that it had some weight, they have been very helpful in making sure that I'm given information which I'm directed to information which is in the public domain, but if I'm going to be doing this, it's as well that I'm doing it properly with accurate information. So you know, I've had some conversations about this issue, and we were talking about flags, and I said, because this is what I think, is that actually this isn't a pro-flag campaign. I actually welcomed the heady days when there weren't flags on food, there were just clear labels. I mean, I don't see food from Spain or France coming covered in flags. I mean, it's nuts. However, interestingly enough, the fishmonger stopped me and he went, well, actually, I go to Boston on international trade fairs selling Scottish seafood, and his salmon, in fact, comes from the salmon that he sells. It's very upmarket price salmon, this, because the salmon he sells comes using a technique that has been used since the days of Robert the Bruce, and it's like a lacrosse sort of net, you know, it's a half thing and half net, and you stand in the water freezing your ankles off, and if there's a thud and you've peaked, and if you're lucky there's a salmon on the riverbed on the riverbank, and he said, actually, I want saltires. He said, if I'm sitting at the far end of a warehouse or a big show, if there's a big saltire up, he said, people will come and see me because they recognise it. Yeah. However, I was speaking to a Nigerian who told me that in Nigeria, the saltire isn't known as something which is associated with Scotland. People in Nigeria love Scottish produce, but they think more of tartan or bagpipers. So you kind of have to mix it up a bit, you know. It's not just, you know, when you're promoting Scotland's brand, we have to find ways which goes across boundaries. But understandably, people will make choices when they have their own private businesses. But I think that it is okay, as long as you're respectful, to contact them and say, have you thought about this? Because the time that I was going through Australia, it was 2012, I think it must have been. I was going through an Australian departure allowance, and that was the first time I saw the monstrosity that is the Great British Haggis, and I just about passed out. And I said to my husband, "Have you seen that?" And we just sort of stood there in slack-jawed horror, looking at it. And it's the packaging. It's the London Eye and it's Big Ben, and we're like, that's haggis. How's that helping our sector? How's that going to help? And then you look at it, and I think it's in Fife, the lad that does it. And I've written to him and gone, what are you playing at? You know, so I don't want something which is as iconic as the haggis persuading tourists in Australia to go to London. You know, so to me it's about market share, and it's about sensible provenance, but all we can do is speak to people and be nice.
I feel sorry for a lot of these producers that are forced to do this. You know, yeah. I used to work in the mushroom business, in a mushroom factory. I saw it, but it went bust 20 odd years ago now because of the Irish mushroom flooding the market. And on the conveyor belt, we were on the package system. Half of them had, at that time, we did one with the salt tire, but it was actually the full top of the punnet was a salt tire, and the other ones on the other line was a Union flag, just for a different market. And I did ask the question all these years ago, why, you know, being a manager, I asked why, because that's what they want. Each shop said, if you want to supply to me, that's what you need to put on it, and if you don't, we don't want them.
Yeah, well, I've had farmers near me up in Angus tell me that they have walked out of supermarkets in disgust when they've seen the way that their produce has been packaged. That they don't know, they have no say in it, and they don't know what's going to happen to it often until they see it.
The strawberry growers, they're packaging their own.
No. So, well, it depends. So, for example, this cherubic farmer from along the Strath from me, they have one line that's their own line, and they package that the way they want to. And he said it's always Scottish packaging because that's what sells, and they can get more money for it. He said the other lines of supermarkets tell them what to do, and that was backed up by the gentleman from the Angus Soft Fruit Growers, as he was then, and he said that it was dictated to them. What's that? Yeah. But there you have the other crux of the matter, which is that for somebody who's doing the packaging, it becomes a question of economics. Is that you might think, well, I want to have my produce labelled as Scottish, but it costs more to have 2 lines of labels going. So if I've got a bigger supermarket saying that they want everything to be the Great British Strawberry, then I'll maybe just do it in all of them because that's cheaper. So
that's the question about economics. About 24 years ago, we were over as a family in Ireland on holiday, and my brother was in the National Executive at the time. I came back and I brought my till receipt. And when you went into the supermarket in Northern Ireland, you're into the supermarket, it asked us the local produce. So you spent £31 in messages, and it came out and told you £15.85 was local produce. Now they could do that in a till receipt and with an asterisk, and that encouraged people to buy local. Why can't we do that here?
We can.
But why will they? Well, they tell me it's because Morrison's is an English supermarket. That's why I've got to accept Union Jacks on it. But I mean, why can't they do that and encourage us to buy local?
They could.
Yeah, very easily. If they could do 24 years ago first, they could, but why wouldn't they?
Well, that's a question for the supermarkets. And it's a question that we should continue to ask. And that takes me very neatly, thank you, to the Send It Back campaign. And it's not my idea, so I can tell you I think it's genius, and I really wish it was my idea. I'm rather miffed I didn't think of it. This lovely lady in Fife, in Kelty, in fact, we were having a conversation similar to this. And I was saying, yes, well, if you see something, then contact the supermarket and say, ask them to keep Scotland the brand, explain, or give it my usual blah blah. And she looked at me gently. I mean, she didn't make me think I was an idiot for not having thought about it, but I'm kicking myself I didn't. And she said, why don't we just send it back? And it was just an idea of such quiet genius. I love it. And it's about making the point. So we contact, for example, a supermarket. Let's not pick one out, but because they're all much of a muchness, or most of them are. So if I write to a supermarket and I say, I take a photograph, please could you think about this and give me an answer as to why this is your policy, and they might get back to me. But her idea is lovely because she said, well, why don't you do so? So the thing is, you get your somebody was saying that they'd bought a cauliflower. You'd bought a cauliflower and you really wanted your cauliflower. And like me, I go to the local Coopy, and if I didn't get my box from the local farm, then there'd be quite, most of the stuff in the local Coopy, regardless of where it comes from, it's hard to find where it's come from. It's all Great British food, which is technically correct. Let's not forget that. But I want to know where it's come from. I want to see clearly where it's come from. And actually, I don't see why a neep should have a bit of plastic wrapped around it. Let's get rid of single-use plastics for a start. So, local procurement, food miles. These are all issues that we have to think about. We have to regain the farm to fork connection. Now, I'm really pleased to see that in Tayside, for example, there's an initiative which is trying to put Scottish food on the menu. We produce some of the best food in the world. We should be feeding it to our kids, not just... Well, not even that, but the thought of spending... Again, it was the wonderful Jim Fairley who said, I think it's 70 pence or 71 pence that is what's spent on a school lunch. Now, these are kids too often don't get a decent meal in the day apart from their school lunch. And we're spending 71 pence on it. I mean, bread that can last a fortnight. How about we get local bakers involved? How about the Dumfries and Galloway did a terrific job showing that it is possible for local food and drink businesses to be involved in procurement, and that you could get organic, fresh food on the tables and it was cost neutral. We can do it, so let's do it. Let's get one of the reasons why the Bistro in the East, to the prominent German supermarkets, still had food in their shelves is because they have a policy of having a low a sort of a local infrastructure where there's low distance between the shop and the farm. Let's get a farm to fork connection back, which is actually meaningful. So this woman's idea is that if you buy your cauliflower and if it is not clearly packaged, you make sure or clearly labelled, you make sure that any packaging that you have is clean and it's dry, because we want to be respectful of our postal workers and people handling it. And whether it be chicken, make sure if it's chicken wrapping, make sure that's properly cleaned and dried. But you send it back. Now, if you want to know how to send it back free post, because most people won't tell you, it will be easily available, just go to your favourite search engine and put in the name of the supermarket and put free post address, and it should pop up, because for consumer legislation, they're supposed to let you send stuff back. So you send it, you get a nice recycled envelope, get the free post address, get your packaging, get a nice little cheerful note, because quite frankly, we should make people's days a little better and try and get them on board. So I've sent in the past nice letters. Some people have sent Christmas cards or Easter cards. Some people, I've written doggerel along the lines of, it did make me mutter when I couldn't find Scottish butter upon my shelf. And just ways of making people's day go a little better and nicer. And then you send it back to the customers' affairs managers. Now, what that does is, some people say, oh, well, I spoke to the cashier about it, and that's fair enough. However, let's bear in mind that most cashiers are probably pretty busy. They probably are under pressures of time. Quite frankly, if people shopping or anything like me, they're probably a bit fed up with seeing my face, and you're just right, okay, fine, but they're trying to be nice, make my day nice. So let's make people's days nicer, and let's put the problem to the people that are paid to deal with it. If you send a letter to customer services, they have to log that. So they've paid for the packaging, which is probably pointless, because why do you have to put packaging on food anyway? Let's get loose packaging, let's get loose food that we don't have to pack it. They've paid for the packaging, they are now paying for your postage, which is legitimate, because this is a legitimate customer issue, and they're paying for the postage, and then they have to pay for somebody's time to handle the issue, to log it and hopefully write you a nice letter back, and then they have to pay to dispose of the aforementioned packaging. So I think that the Send It Back campaign is an act of quiet genius, and would urge you to enjoy it to its fullest and most frequent. And if you think of the amount of packaging that's on food when you go shopping, you could quite happily have 7 or 8 items every day to send back to them, separately.
I'm conscious of the time, but I wonder, one of the things which I don't think is enough is made of is the question of actually taste, and people being educated in the matter of taste and tasting something, which is, for example, you take an egg, the different types of egg, free range and all the rest and that kind of thing. And I would have thought that would be something which would be worthwhile pursuing, that the government should pursue, about the quality of taste. Well, because that then, so just finish, that then leads on to the question of how we reconnect with our land, which is then obviously a huge issue now in Scotland as well. And people, consumers, if they were able to afford it, would then choose on the basis of taste, or prefer to choose on the basis of taste than just taking what's that. But a lot of people, don't actually, they can't tell the difference in taste, because it's not actually been demonstrated to them, the difference in quality of taste between, A of the product and B of the product.
So I have a friend who used to work in France, and she works in the food industry, and she says that at the age of 5, children in France are told how to pick a camembert, and you have food appreciation as part of your curriculum. And I think that of course, I think that's something that children should be shown what quality is. I mean, my kids, on a basic level, how many Scots mammies, how many of us can remember our mothers as they went to get the milk out after it had been handed over by the milkman, and you'd open the milk and you'd sniff it first. I still do that. My kids are completely freaked out. They go, "Mum, just look at the date." No. You can't beat the nose, but only with some things. So I think that reconnecting with the full experience of food and drink is something, it's such a pleasurable thing, and the slow food movement, that's what that's about. It's about people sitting down together and understanding what quality produce is and how to prepare it, and then actually understanding what a quality experience of dining is, not fine dining, but just sitting down and breaking bread as a community or in a family. But we're losing so much of that on the most basic level. I was listening to a programme in the World Service the other day talking about how many people live in single households and cooking for yourself, and there are so many things that I think we have the potential to use food for as a way of reconnection. But we have to I think it has to start with schools. I think it should start with parents and families, but I think that schools have got a huge part that they can play in the home economic side of things.
I think schools do. Can I just say the next teacher? I think schools do. Some children have never handled knives forks when they come to school.
Oh, yeah.
We have nurture classes so that children sit and have a meal around the table. You ask children in class how many of you sit at the table for
Yep.
a meal. The answer is no, they sit in front of the television and it's fast food all the time. So schools do the best they can, but you know, there's just so much on the curriculum.
Yeah, but
you know.
okay, so the reason why I frame that in the way that I did is that parents have the primary duty, but schools are the ones who often pick up the slack of the ones who either can't because they've never been shown how, because they haven't, as parents, as children, they didn't have that experience. So my daughter, she's at school and they do. So she refused to eat the school lunches. I was delighted when we moved back here because having lived overseas for years where there weren't school lunches, after 10 years of lunch boxes for 3 fussy children, including a country that didn't do bread, so I was having to bake my own bread, and then they complained about it because it was kept in the fridge because the tropics isn't kind to bread. Anyway, so I was so pleased to come back to a country that did school lunches. Like, hey kids, fine, you're going for school lunches, that's fine. And they were really excited because there was vegetarian food in the menu, and they came back and went, Mum, it's awful. And I don't know why it should be awful, because the schools they go to actually have kitchens, and you know, it could be fantastic. But there were just a few things, like the basic ingredients right, but just the time and all the rest of it wasn't there. But as part of the home ec side of things, but they tried, you know, they put courgette in cakes and stuff like that. There's a lot of effort to go into it. But she came home one day really pleased because as part of their home economics, they'd had to prepare a meal, and as part of the meal preparation, they had to work out how many food miles had gone into that meal. And so there are really good, interesting, meaningful conversations being had. And she was really pleased because she'd won, because the tatties had come from the farm next door and she'd made Colombian potato soup. And the only thing that the teacher said added the miles to it was the fact that she'd used a chilli. And I was really cross because she'd used a dry chilli from the teacher, but I had them growing in my house. So she could have had 0 food miles. But that's just me being competitive.
My wife and me were up in the Skye last autumn. We went into Arbroath Castle.
We've had this conversation. Sorry, this is Harris Tweed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
About the labels.
Incredible. Harris with a big Union Jack over it.
So the Harris Tweed issue, that is really important. The thing about textiles, I've spoken to a number of people from different mills across the whole of Scotland, and they have a real problem with for example, some of the mills down in the borders. They've got a real problem with being undercut by tartan tat shops selling substandard tartans and tweeds that have come from overseas, and people go, oh, Scottish stuff, it's not that good, is it? Because they don't know that it's not Scottish because it's covered in tartan. So I know that there's talk about trying to find ways of helping to protect our fabrics and tweeds. Now, Harris tweed is a really special fabric because it is protected by law, it's protected by statute. And when the debacle, somebody had posted something about this a year or so ago on I think it was my Twitter page, talking about Harris tweed that also had a British tweed label. And originally, initially what the response was, well, British Tweed actually is a company, so that's their own branding. But subsequently I saw a statement out of Harris Tweed which said that they had asked British Tweed to remove those labels because they thought that it actually might be in contravention of the Harris Tweed trademark, which is very specific. So they had asked for those labels to be removed. Now, it may well be that there is stock that people didn't get the memo, but I have been contacted by tour operators who tell me that it definitely affects sales. If people from China or Malaysia or people who've spent a lot of money to come on holiday, they want to spend money on a high quality item. If they go into a shop and they see a textile that on the one hand says that it's from Scotland, but on the other hand says it's Great British, they will put it back. And one of my colleagues who was in Skye, and he saw this as well, in fact, just over a year ago, and he was speaking to one of the shopkeepers, I'm not sure which shop it was in, but they say that they don't like it because it hits their sales. So there are a number of issues surrounding that, but I would urge, most of us have got access to PR in our pockets. The mobile phone, while it drives me nuts, and my children would say that they sort of lost me to my mobile phone over the last year and a half, take a photograph, share it, go online, tag at Keep Scot Brand if you're on Twitter, or send it to the Facebook page, or send it to the company, or use your phone, take a photograph. It's really helpful if you're taking a photograph, for example, of produce on shelves. It's really helpful if you can take a photograph which identifies where you are, so that I can if I see it and I take it up, then you can go to Tesco's or the Co-op or Morrison's or whomever, and so it's useful if a photograph is clear and shows any discrepancy. Or sometimes sometimes I've been rearranging vegetables to kind of take a photograph of it, and I'll put everything back because I don't want to, let's make people's lives pleasant. But use if you see something, say something.
Right shot was it so near Sky, so next to Harris, where it,
Yeah.
And then they had this big Union Jack on it.
And did you speak to them about it?
Yes, it's in a gift shop.
And what did they say?
They told us that the Harris Tweed had then been sent to somewhere in England and had been made into like the handbag, and therefore it was quite right that it came back with the Union Jack. And the Harris label is like this size on the product, and the Union Jack label, without exaggeration, was this size.
Well, it's because that if it's a company I'm thinking of, the company calls itself British Tweed. So I can see why somebody would say, well, that's their brand. However, it is not helpful, I would suggest, to Scottish sales. I have noted, having been on recently, the Harris Tweed has got a tremendous website, and I've been on recently and looked at this year's logo, and it would appear to say that that Harris Tweed, if memory serves, it's Harris Tweed, and they say made in the islands of Scotland, or the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. So they have worked to make their label less equivocal, to try and make sure that people can see that it's a Scottish label, because I think that they recognise that they may well be losing sales because of once the fabric is gone, it's hard for them to be able to dictate what happens. However, they definitely did say that they had contacted the company because they felt it was a contravention of their trademark. So take a photograph next time and send it to Harris Tweed Authority and tell them.
I'm sure everyone will agree we've had an extremely informative talk this afternoon, which has really opened my eyes as to what's actually going on there and given me concern for the future of Scottish produce. But hopefully information is power, and we can get out there and we can do something about it and stop it. So on behalf of everybody here, I'd just like to thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for
and
asking
telling
me to
us
come.
all this information. And we have sourced this very carefully just to be from Scotland. I would like you to accept this little wooden bowl on behalf of us this afternoon.